Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Sunday, November 24th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. We're only doing one today, Kevin Noon. The game against Michigan in 6 days. I don't think we're even going to get a chance to talk about the game against Michigan. Not on this show. There'll be plenty of time to talk about that later on. If you want to hear Tony Gerdeman and I talk about it, we did it on the post-game show sort of towards the end of the show, so you can get a little bit of snippet of that. But man, oh man, is there a lot to talk about with the Ohio State beating Indiana 38-15. Kind of a weird score, kind of a weird end to the game. Indiana punched in a touchdown, went for two, tried an onside kick at under 2 minutes left. Ryan Day didn't seem to take that all that well. Trevian Henderson runs down the field, slides at the one, and you think, okay, they're going to take a knee and get out of here. Nope, they punch in one more touchdown to make it 38-15. That was as thorough a butt kicking as you've seen in all three phases of the game. In a game like that, a top five matchup, that's as thorough butt kicking in all three phases of the game as I can remember since, the Wisconsin Big Ten championship game. It wasn't quite that bad, and that was not a top five Wisconsin team, but it has been a while since Ohio State's done that to a team with a number that small next to its name.
You look at their top five matchups. Oregon was kind of a back-and-forth type of game, hold on for dear life, not able to do that. You go to Penn State, that was a close game throughout. This one, outside of Ohio State, and its patented slow start, really dominated until that final drive for Indiana when, I think Ohio State would have loved to have held them to 7. Obviously proves a point, a team coming in, leading the nation in scoring, everything else. That doesn't necessarily happen, but Ohio State really held Indiana to just about nothing offensively. And then defensively, Ohio State, once it kind of figured out what it needed to do, really was able to move the ball. And then obviously special teams with a punt block, with a punt return. It was a very thorough type of game. We'll see what the committee thinks about it. Obviously, it's going to be really hard to move up from 2 to 1, but could some people sit there and question, their first place vote?
Well, at this point, that almost doesn't matter because if Ohio State handles their business against Michigan, they get another shot at Oregon.
Oh, it matters.
If they win that, you're already ahead of Texas. Texas, as of the time we're recording this, is still not done. They're pulling away from Kentucky 24-7 right now, early in the second quarter. That can't be right. That must be the third quarter. Anyway. By the time you listen to this, you know what happened with Texas. Either way, Ohio State's win over Indiana is going to probably hold more water with the committee than Texas's win over Kentucky. And Texas has to go play Texas A&M next week. We'll see how that one goes. But right now, Ohio State, now you get 2 top 5 wins, 1 on the road. You have the number 1 team in the nation. You went to their place. You lost by 1. I would be hard pressed to, if the Big Ten championship game is close and Ohio State loses and it's close, I'd be hard pressed to think that they wouldn't be the 5 seed. And if they win, I'd be hard pressed to think that they wouldn't be the 1 seed.
No, that makes a lot of sense because the Big Ten champion is probably going to be the 1 seed, as the SEC doesn't have anybody that wants to do this. And, forget about the other conferences. So that's what's going to be there. And then the 5 seed is going to be your number 2 Big Ten or SEC team. And again, these aren't things that are dictated by the committee. These are things that are dictated by logic. So, it's the 1 or the 5, and you can sit there and talk about the finer points of being the 1 versus the 5 and how matchups are going to work and everything else. But, the reality is it's a good problem to have.
So let's talk about some of the good problems that Ohio State had on Saturday. Let's start with the defense. Indiana goes 11 plays for 70 yards on the opening drive. After that, so 70 yards on the opening drive. After that, 8 yards, -7 yards, -4 yards, -2 yards, 2 yards, 8 yards, 32 yards. That one ended in a punt, -11 yards. And then 15 plays, 75 yards on a drive that started with 9 minutes left in the game, and it took 7 minutes off the clock when Indiana was still down to 3 scores at that point. That was Ohio State. You could see Ohio State kind of going, okay, would you like to run out the clock for us? Okay, that's fine. And yeah, I'm sure they wanted to hold Indiana without another touchdown. But that very much felt to me like Indiana going, let's just make this respectable. They were not in a big hurry And Ohio State's defense, for a huge chunk of the game, every time Curtis Rourke, sorry, too many years of Ohio University football in my brain. Curtis Rourke, every time Curtis Rourke stepped back to pass, he was just under assault immediately.
It was a little bit of a slow start for Ohio State's defense, but it seems that Jim Knowles, the technician, was able to make some dial adjustments and everything else. And Cody Simon had himself a tremendous game. I mean, there were a lot of defensive players that were able to put up some numbers, but nobody like Cody Simon. He was just all over Rourke, throughout the game. I think at some points, I have to give Rourke credit for continuing on because he was starting to get abused to a point that was just really uncomfortable. But, Ohio State's defense answered the call. And Indiana's defense or offense is different than what we're going to see from Michigan next week, but I think coming in with a good feeling. You can sit there and you can look at the Northwestern game. Well, no, Northwestern ain't no good. That's fine. As being evidenced by their game against Michigan. But Indiana has a good offense, and you sit there and you have those successes. You can build off of that, and you're going to have to be able to stop Kalel Mullings. You're going to have to be able to stop a lot of dink and dunks to Colston Loveland and some, just a lot of little short passes in the next game. We'll get into that as this week goes on, but I'm a big supporter of having those good feelings. Obviously, if Ohio State loses this game, there are no good feelings, but that's not where we're at.
Yeah, and the defense, you mentioned Cody Simon, 10 tackles, 2.5 sacks, Sonny Styles, 8 tackles, Jack Sawyer, a sack and a half, JT Tuimoloau, a sack. They were just all over the place. That was as dominating a defensive performance against statistically a good offense. It was very easy to look at the Purdue game and the Northwestern game and go, yeah. But this is an offense that had really been having its way with pretty much everyone they played all season long, and Ohio State was just dominant after that first drive. Ohio State was also very efficient in the run game. Nothing exciting. Last week during one of the shows, I said to Tony Gerderman, if they can run for 4 yards a carry, I think that's enough for them to win. They finished with 4.0 yards per carry. Quinshon Judkins, 14 carries, 36 yards, long of 8. It was nothing exciting, but there was just kind of thud, 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 thud. Judkins and Henderson have sort of turned into a little bit of a thunder and lightning thing where Judkins is just kind of pounding and pounding and pounding, and then Henderson comes in, 9 carries, 68 yards, long of 39. So, he ended up with 7.6 yards per carry, but there was a 39-yarder right at the end that sort of skewed that number a little bit. But even so, he was around 4 yards a carry before that. It was a very efficient run game, which then opened things up in the pass game.
And Indiana was very good against the run. One of my predictions was that Ohio State would run for $1.25. I was 10 yards off at that point. But as Tom had mentioned, a 39-yarder in the final minute of the game kind of pumped those numbers up a little bit. But, we're not seeing the home runs that we saw earlier in the season, but that's what happens when you leave non-conference and you get into conference play. You get into the Big Ten, which there are going to be a lot of people who are going to say negative this and negative that, but there's some pretty good run defenses in the conference. And, what they're getting out of Henderson, what they're getting out of Judkins is just what the doctor ordered. We didn't necessarily see a lot of Will Howard run, which, I think is fine. Obviously, Ohio State wins this game by 23. You didn't need to see it. Is that going to be different next week? Well, I guess we're going to have to wait and see at that point. But, I think the one run thing that I will take out of it as a negative is Ohio State on a fourth and I think it was a 4th and goal they could have gotten a first on the 1.
Yeah.
And they were on the 3 and they couldn't punch it in. Still some of those issues, but anything that happens in the first quarter, you just kind of have to write off.
Yeah, and the fact that Will Howard played a top 5 team, we talk all the time about the fact that you're playing Western Michigan, you're not going to run Will Howard, but boy, if it's a top 5 matchup, you're really going to need to lean on him. And they didn't. They didn't need to lean on him at all in the run game. In the pass game, 22 of 26, 201 yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 85% completion. He threw the ball to Emeka Egbuka 7 times. Emeka Egbuka had 7 catches, 80 yards. He threw the ball 4 times to Carnell Tate, 4 catches, 68 yards. He threw the ball 3 times to Travion Henderson, 3 catches. The only person who didn't was Jeremiah Smith, 5 targets, 3 catches for him. But if you're completing 85% of your passes, that's going to keep you. I mean, unless you're dinking and dunking behind the line of scrimmage, you would be hard-pressed to not stay on schedule with that.
Yeah, you're moving the chains, and that was a concern of mine with the loss of Seth McLaughlin, was that Ohio State might get a little too cute, try and test the middle a little too much in the run game, and be in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 a lot. And after the first series, which didn't go anywhere for Ohio State, they kind of got away from that. So they were able to move the chains. They were able to stay ahead of schedule. And that's why Ohio State's drives all, largely seem to have a positive outcome.
Yeah, and it was, Ohio State's drives, I'll pull them up right now. Punt on the first drive, 3 plays, 8 yards, just couldn't get it going starting off. 15 plays, 73 yards, that was the one that ended on downs inside the 5. And then touchdown, then an interception on a kind of a deflected pass from Jelani Thurman, a touchdown, a punt in the third quarter, and then a field goal and a touchdown. And
I had to kick the field goal to see if they could remember how to do it.
Yeah, well, and they were at that point. It was just that made it 31-7, and it was just kind of okay. Now you're up 24 points, and you've just made it a little more difficult. Now they need to kick. Now they need to go for three 2-point conversions. If it got to that, that was just a very efficient, very effective, very thorough win for Ohio State. A complete win in a way that we haven't necessarily seen them do in some of these other big games. You go to Penn State and there's a bunch of stuff to nitpick. There was, the first drive for the offense, the first drive for the defense, okay, the situation in the goal line at one point, but really, special teams. You mentioned that there was the bad snap and they forced a turnover there. Caleb Downs returns a punt for the first time in 10 years and 1 day, a touchdown return on a punt for Ohio State. That also was against Indiana. That was Jalen Marshall. That also was the week before Michigan, and so that was that was one that had been sort of felt like it was coming for a long time. Finally got here. Now they turn the page to Michigan. We will probably we'll talk ourselves. I guess I can't say talk ourselves blue in the face this week.
Don't wear any blue.
We'll talk a bunch about that this week. But just sort of early thoughts on the Michigan game this year. It's almost a sandwich game in some ways. You had a top 5 matchup here. Michigan going to come in, it appears, 6-5, and then the week after that, if you handle business against Michigan, you're going to Indianapolis to go take on number 1 Oregon. For a game that for years has been the game, and is literally the game, and has been the game that for the last 12 months has been circled on calendars inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center because they have beaten Michigan in their last 3 tries. It's almost a little bit of a sandwich game, which is just bizarre.
You just have to make sure that you are playing the losses on the TV, that you keep making sure that the nerve is still a little raw. When you touch it, it hurts and it jolts you because it's really easy to say, well, this team's 6-5 and they can't throw the ball and they largely forget to run the ball at a lot of times and everything else. And I think Michigan is doing Ohio State a little bit of a favor in its game against Northwestern and putting up some points there. Hey, get your head out of the clouds. You've got to be ready for this type of game. And yeah, it is a sandwich game, but it's what happens when you get into November football and into December and January, and we expand the playoffs anymore. February. I mean, it's knuckle busting time like every single week.
Yeah, well, we will be expanding our coverage this week as we head into that game against Michigan. Plenty to talk about. We know you guys have travel and all that kind of stuff, so we will crank out some extra podcasts for you this week above and beyond what we normally do to give you some stuff to listen to while you were in the car and around family and whatever else you're going to be doing this week. So we'll have plenty of coverage for you all week long at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. Oh, yeah, they had David Sanders, 5-star offensive tackle. Going to be a lot to talk about on that front. Got a commitment as well from 2027 wide receiver Jameer Brown. So a lot to talk about on the recruiting front this week, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Mark covers recruiting. We got our whole team of X's and O's gurus there as well. Going to try and get you some some Ross Fulton shows this week, so you can kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into what to expect from the Buckeyes this week, what we learned from the Indiana game, and maybe even a little bit of a look ahead at Michigan. So a lot to talk about this week, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you've been thinking about becoming a member, well, this would be a great time to do it.
Do it.
It is $4.99 for your first month, and that first month right now goes all the way through the first round of the college football playoff. You get the Michigan game, you get potentially the Big Ten championship game, you get early signing day, that's on December 4th this year, plus you get the college football playoff selection show, plus you get all of the first round of the college football playoff as well. So going to be a lot happening over the next month. We would love to experience it all with you at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.